It's been nearly 3 months since a shooter executed a mother, father, their 2 young children, and the family's 3 dogs in southwest suburban Romeoville. This afternoon, the ABC 7i team has learned new details about how the murders occurred, who police say was responsible, and glimpses of a motive.
The door swings open to silence. It's the kind of silence that doesn't feel right. The kind that makes experienced police officers pause before they take another step forward. The kind that carries weight. September 17th, 2023. A Sunday morning in Romeoville, Illinois. A welfare check at a home on Concord Avenue. Alberto Rolon hadn't shown up for work. His family wasn't answering calls. Relatives were worried. The officers step inside. What they find in the next few moments will haunt this quiet suburban community for years to come. Not one body, not 2, 4. An entire family gone, a mother, a father, 2 young boys who should have been getting ready for another week of school. And then the detail that makes it even more chilling. Even the family's 3 dogs are dead. Every living thing in this house has been extinguished. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This wasn't random violence spilling into the wrong neighborhood. This was something else entirely, something planned. Something personal. Something that would reveal a web of betrayal so twisted that even seasoned investigators would struggle to make sense of it. Because what happened inside this ordinary, suburban home wasn't just murder. It was the destruction of an entire world, carried out by people who were supposed to be on the outside, but had somehow gotten terrifyingly close. Welcome to Blood Betrayal Files. In today's case, we're diving deep into one of the most disturbing family homicides in recent Illinois history, the Romeoville Massacre, a case where an affair, jealousy, and alleged psychological manipulation converged into an act of violence so complete that it left no survivors, no witnesses, and almost no answers. Before we go further, if you're drawn to cases like this, cases where the truth hides in plain sight until it's too late, make sure you subscribe to our channel and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and what you think really drove this tragedy. Now let's get into it. Let's rewind to the beginning, September 16th, 2023. It's a Saturday evening in Romeoville, a quiet village southwest of Chicago. The kind of place where people know their neighbors, where kids ride bikes in the street, where nothing much happens that makes the news. Inside a home in the 500 block of Concord Avenue, a family is going about their weekend. Alberto Rolon, 38 years old, a working man with responsibilities and routines. Rolon-Bartolomei, 32, his partner and the mother of their 2 sons. And those boys, Adriel and Diego, elementary school-aged kids in the middle of childhoods that should have stretched out for decades ahead of them. From the outside, there's nothing about this household that suggests danger. No public disputes with neighbors. No signs of instability that anyone could see. Just a family living their lives in a home that was supposed to be their safe place. But somewhere between that Saturday evening and the early hours of Sunday morning, everything inside that house changed. We don't know the exact moment. Police would later determine that the killings likely occurred sometime in that window, late September 16th into the early hours of September 17th. We don't know if the family had any warning. We don't know if they understood what was happening or why. What we do know is this: by the time Sunday morning arrived, every person in that house was gone. Alberto Rolon, Rolon-Bartolomei, Adriel, Diego, even the 3 family dogs. Not a single living being remained, and here's the thing about family homicides that makes them so uniquely horrifying. These crimes don't happen in dark alleys or anonymous places. They happen in kitchens, in bedrooms, in spaces decorated with family photos and kids' artwork. They happen in the one place where people are supposed to let their guard down because they believe they're safe. For the Rolon-Bartolomei family, that belief was shattered in the worst way imaginable. By Sunday morning, when Alberto didn't show up for work, people started to worry. Calls went unanswered, text messages sat unread, family members tried to reach them, nothing. Concern turned to alarm. Someone requested a welfare check, And that's when police arrived at the house on Concord Avenue and walked into a scene that would become one of the most talked about murder cases in the Chicago suburbs in recent years. When Romeoville police officers entered that home on September 17th, they weren't walking into an active situation. There was no standoff, no ongoing threat. What they found was stillness and finality. 4 bodies. The adults, Alberto and Zoraida, and their 2 young sons, all dead inside the residence. The initial sweep of the home revealed something else that deepened the horror. The family's 3 dogs were also dead. This wasn't collateral damage. This wasn't an oversight. Someone had made sure that nothing in this house survived. That detail alone told investigators something crucial. This wasn't a panicked, spur-of-the-moment act. This wasn't someone who broke in, encountered unexpected resistance, and fired in fear. This was methodical. This was someone who wanted to eliminate every living presence in that home. Police immediately began processing the scene. In cases like this, the house itself becomes a witness. Every room, every surface, every disturbance or lack of disturbance tells a story. And the story this house told was troubling. There were signs that someone had tried to make this look like something it wasn't. Investigators would later report evidence suggesting the scene had been staged to resemble a burglary. Cut screens, the appearance of forced entry. Details designed to point investigators in the wrong direction, but experienced detectives know the difference between real burglaries and staged ones. Real burglars don't systematically kill every person and animal in a house. Real burglars don't stick around long enough to create that level of carnage. Real burglars want to get in, grab what they can, and get out before anyone even knows they've been there. This was something else. The victims had been shot. Later reporting, based on investigative records, indicated the weapon was likely a 9mm firearm. But here's one of the enduring mysteries of this case. That weapon was never recovered. Despite all the investigation that followed, despite all the digital evidence and surveillance and forensic work, the actual gun used to kill this family was never found. Within hours of discovering the bodies, Romeoville police made a public statement that carried enormous weight for the surrounding community. This was not a random act. This was a targeted attack. That statement was meant to reassure neighbors that they weren't in danger from some unknown killer roaming the streets. But it also meant something far more unsettling for those who knew the family. If this was targeted, someone had a reason to want this entire family dead. Someone knew them. Someone had access, or at least knowledge of their home and their routines. Someone had planned this. The question that gripped everyone, from investigators to the public to the family's devastated relatives, was simple and terrible. Who would do this, and why? The answer came faster than anyone expected. Within days of the discovery, Romeoville police had a name: Nathaniel Huey Jr., a man from Streamwood, Illinois, roughly 30 miles north of Romeoville. At first glance, the connection wasn't obvious. Huey wasn't a member of the immediate family. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't someone most people in the Rolon-Bartolomei circle would have recognized. But police had identified him as the primary suspect. And once they did, the urgency of the investigation shifted. This was no longer just a crime scene analysis. This was a manhunt. Authorities issued bulletins describing Huey as potentially dangerous. Law enforcement alerts described him as irrational and erratic, aware that police were looking for him, and possessing extensive firearms training. That last detail mattered. This wasn't someone who had picked up a gun for the first time in a moment of rage. This was someone who knew how to use one. There was more. Huey had a criminal history. Court records reportedly showed prior cases, and there were indications that he was under a court order that should have prevented him from possessing firearms at all. So now investigators were looking for an armed suspect with training, a history, and apparently a direct connection to the victims. But what was that connection? The public didn't know yet. But behind the scenes, detectives were piecing together a story that would explain not just who killed this family, but why. And the answer would lead them into one of the oldest, most destructive motives in human history: jealousy, betrayal, and the collapse of intimate relationships into violence. Here's where the case transforms from a brutal but mysterious killing into something far more personal. According to police findings that were made public later in the investigation, Rolon-Bartolomei and Nathaniel Huey Jr. had been involved in a romantic relationship. Read that again. The victim, Zoraida, the mother of 2 young boys, the partner of Alberto Rolon, had been in a relationship with the man police now believed had killed her and her entire family. This revelation changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a family being targeted by a stranger or even an acquaintance. This was about intimacy turned toxic. This was about secrets that couldn't stay hidden. This was about a relationship that existed in the shadows until it exploded into the light in the most horrific way possible. In true crime, we talk a lot about motive, and the truth is, most motives aren't complicated. They're ancient and primal: money, revenge, jealousy, control. The desire to eliminate someone who knows too much or threatens to expose something hidden. But here's what makes family crimes so particularly devastating. The motive often grows quietly inside relationships that look normal from the outside. A workplace friendship that crosses a line. A private connection that starts as escape and ends as obsession. According to investigators, Zoraida and Huey's relationship was known. It wasn't a secret to everyone. Alberto Rolon knew, and there was someone else who knew too: Ermalinda Palomo, Nathaniel Huey Jr.'s fiancé. Now the emotional geometry of this case becomes clear. This wasn't just a simple affair. This was a tangle of relationships, each person aware of betrayals happening on multiple levels. Zoraida was involved with Huey while in a household with Alberto and their children. Huey was engaged to Palomo while involved with Zoraida. Alberto knew about the affair, and Palomo, according to what investigators would later conclude, knew too. 4 adults, 2 relationships, and a web of resentment, jealousy, and humiliation building quietly over time. In cases like this, there's almost always a breaking point. A moment when the tension that's been building in private finally ruptures. A confrontation, a threat. We don't know exactly what that breaking point was in this case, but we know what came after. And what came after was the decision, allegedly made by more than one person, that Rolon-Bartolomei and everyone in her household had to die. Early in the investigation, the public narrative around Ermalinda Palomo was confused and contradictory. In late September 2023, shortly after the murders, and while police were still searching for Huey, an attorney representing Palomo's family made a public statement. The statement said Palomo was not involved in the killings. It said she was, in fact, another victim. It claimed she was home at the time of the murders and had nothing to do with what happened in Romeoville. That version of events positioned Palomo as an innocent bystander, a woman caught up in her fiancé's violent breakdown, someone who had no knowledge and no control over what Huey had done. But that version didn't hold. In December 2023, Romeoville police made their own public statement, and this one painted a very different picture. According to police, Palomo had prior knowledge of the murders. She had participated in planning them, and digital evidence indicated that she had driven the vehicle used in connection with the crime from Streamwood to Romeoville and back on the night the family was killed. Let that sink in for a moment. If police were right, Palomo wasn't just aware of what Huey was planning. She wasn't just a bystander who found out too late to stop it. She was, according to investigators, an active participant. She allegedly helped plan the attack. She allegedly drove Huey to the scene, and she allegedly drove him away after the murders were complete. This was no longer a case of one man acting alone in a jealous rage. This was something coordinated, deliberate, planned between 2 people who both had reasons to want Zoraida gone. But here's where the case gets even darker, because according to later investigative records reported by multiple news outlets, in October 2024, the planning may have involved something far more twisted than simple jealousy. Police records reportedly indicated that Palomo had created fake online personas, false identities, deceptive messaging accounts, and she allegedly used those fake identities to manipulate Huey's perception of reality itself. According to what investigators pieced together from digital evidence, Palomo allegedly convinced Huey that he was entangled with a dangerous criminal organization, a supposed Mexican-Bulgarian crime network. And she allegedly told him, through these fake accounts, that Zoraida was a mole, an informant, someone working against him within this imaginary conspiracy. None of it was real, but if police were right, Huey believed it was. And that belief, that manufactured paranoia, may have been what pushed him from jealousy and resentment into the conviction that Zoraida and everyone around her had to be eliminated. Let's pause here and really think about what investigators were alleging. This wasn't just about a woman being jealous of her fiancé's affair. This was, according to police files, about the systematic construction of a false reality designed to justify murder. Imagine this: you're Nathaniel Huey Jr., you're involved in an affair with Zoraida. Maybe you're conflicted, maybe you're planning to leave Palomo. But then you start getting messages from accounts you don't fully recognize, but that seem to know things about you. Messages warning you about threats. Messages telling you that you're under surveillance by a criminal organization. Messages that paint Zoraida not as your lover, but as your enemy, someone planted in your life to gather information and betray you. If those messages are convincing enough, if they come with enough detail and enough apparent insider knowledge, they might not sound crazy. They might sound real. And once you believe they're real, once you accept that framework, violence starts to feel like survival. According to later reporting based on police records, Huey and the fake accounts, allegedly controlled by Palomo, had conversations about how to kill Zoraida. They discussed the neighborhood. They discussed surveillance cameras. They discussed how to make it look like a burglary rather than a targeted hit. This is premeditation on a disturbing level. Not just planning a crime, but planning the narrative around the crime, planning the cover story. And it wasn't just talk. According to the investigative files, there was evidence of actual reconnaissance. Huey and Palomo allegedly researched the area around the Concord Avenue home. They allegedly looked for cameras. They allegedly discussed how to enter the house in a way that would support the burglary story. The cut screens that police found at the scene, the ones that looked like forced entry, may not have been improvised in the moment. They may have been part of the plan all along. Now it's important to note something here. We are talking about what police believed based on digital evidence, phone records, and investigative analysis. None of this was tested in a courtroom. There was no trial. No defense attorney got to challenge the interpretation of those messages or argue that the evidence meant something else. But what we do have is a detailed investigative file, reviewed and reported on by multiple credible news organizations, that paints a picture of a murder plot shaped by both jealousy and manipulation. The question that haunts this case is this: how much of what happened was driven by Huey's own rage and obsession, and how much was carefully cultivated by Palomo to push him toward an act he might not have committed on his own? We'll never know for certain. But what we do know is that by the night of September 16th, 2023, someone had decided that the entire Rolon-Bartolomei family had to die. Sometime between the late evening of Saturday, September 16th, and the early morning hours of Sunday, September 17th, someone entered the home on Concord Avenue. We don't know the exact timeline. We don't know if the family was asleep or awake. We don't know if there was a confrontation or if the attack came without warning. What we do know, based on the evidence and later reporting, is that the person who entered that house was armed with a 9mm firearm. And that person used it to kill Alberto Rolon, Zoraida Bartolomei, and their 2 young sons. And then they killed the dogs. Think about that last detail for a moment, because it tells us something about the mindset of whoever did this. Dogs bark, dogs alert. Dogs are witnesses in their own way. Killing them wasn't mercy. It was elimination of every variable that could go wrong. This was not a crime of passion in the traditional sense. Passion implies heat, chaos, loss of control. This was controlled. This was execution. According to police, the scene had been staged to look like a burglary. But the sheer level of violence, the fact that every person in the house was killed, made that narrative impossible to sustain. Real burglars don't commit quadruple homicides. Real burglars run at the first sign of resistance. The house on Concord Avenue wasn't the scene of a burglary. It was the scene of an annihilation. And after it was done, after every life in that home had been taken, the person or people responsible didn't stay to face what they'd done. They left, and they ran. Within hours, the house would be silent and still, waiting for someone to notice that something was wrong, waiting for the welfare check that would finally bring police through the door. But the people who had done this were already gone, already on the move, already trying to put distance between themselves and the horror they'd left behind. After the murders, Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo were no longer in Illinois. Police, working with speed and focus, began tracking their movements. In modern investigations, digital trails are often more reliable than physical ones. License plate readers, cell tower pings, financial transactions, surveillance footage from gas stations and highway cameras. All of it started pointing in one direction, south and west, out of Illinois and toward Oklahoma. For investigators, this was a critical window. The first 48 hours after a homicide are often decisive. Evidence is freshest. Memories are clearest. And if suspects are on the run, the longer they stay free, the harder they are to find. But in this case, Huey and Palomo weren't trying to disappear into a crowd or hide in a remote location. They were moving, and moving fast, and that movement left traces. On September 20th, 2023, just 3 days after the bodies were discovered, authorities in Catoosa, Oklahoma, got a hit. A digital license plate reader flagged the vehicle connected to Huey. Police in Oklahoma were alerted. Units moved into position. And what should have been a routine traffic stop turned into something much more volatile, because Nathaniel Huey Jr. wasn't planning to be taken alive. When police in Catoosa, Oklahoma attempted to stop the vehicle linked to Nathaniel Huey Jr., he didn't pull over. He ran. A pursuit began. High speed, dangerous. The kind of chase that ends one of two ways, with a surrender or with a crash. This one ended with a crash. The vehicle went off the road and caught fire. Officers approached, weapons drawn, prepared for a confrontation. And then they heard gunshots, not shots fired at them, shots from inside or near the vehicle. When officers finally secured the scene, they found two people, Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo, both suffering from gunshot wounds. Initial reports were chaotic, as they often are in situations like this. Both were described as critically injured. Both were transporting for medical care, but the injuries were too severe. Huey was dead, and shortly after, Palomo died as well. At first, the exact sequence of events inside that vehicle was unclear. Who shot whom? Was there a struggle? It took months for a clearer picture to emerge. In February 2024, Oklahoma medical examiners ruled Nathaniel Huey Jr.'s death a suicide by gunshot wound to the head. Later reporting, based on police investigative files, suggested something even more specific, that Huey had shot Palomo before turning the gun on himself. If that sequence is accurate, it means the last act of violence in this case was Huey eliminating the one person who allegedly helped him plan the massacre in Romeoville. The one person who, according to police, had manipulated his thinking, driven him to paranoia, and participated in the plot that led to 4 deaths. Whether that final shooting was an act of rage, regret, or a desire to tie up loose ends, we'll never know. Huey didn't leave a note. Palomo didn't get a chance to speak. And just like that, both of the people police believed were responsible for one of the most horrific family murders in Illinois history were gone. no arrest, no interrogation. No trial, no testimony, no cross-examination. The case was over before it ever had a chance to be fully tested. In most high-profile murder cases, the public gets a resolution through the criminal justice system. Arrests, arraignments, preliminary hearings, a trial where evidence is presented, witnesses are questioned, and a jury decides guilt or innocence. That didn't happen here, because both of the people Romeoville police identified as responsible for the murders died in Oklahoma on September 20th, 2023. There was no one left to charge. No one left to prosecute, no one left to defend, and that matters, because what we have in this case is a police theory, a substantial body of digital and circumstantial evidence, and later released investigative records. But we don't have the clarity that comes from an adversarial legal process. We don't have a defense attorney challenging the interpretation of those text messages. We don't have expert witnesses debating the forensic evidence. We don't have cross-examination testing the reliability of the digital trail. We have the investigation, we have the conclusions, but we don't have the trial. Now, that doesn't mean the police theory is wrong. Investigators in this case had access to phones, messages, location data, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence. They built what appears to be a detailed and compelling narrative. But it does mean that some of the most explosive allegations in this case, the fake personas, the manufactured conspiracy, the extent of Palomo's involvement, were never subjected to the kind of scrutiny that a courtroom provides. And that leaves room for questions, room for doubt, room for people to wonder if there's more to the story that we'll never fully understand. In many ways, that makes this case even more haunting, because we are left with a detailed explanation of what investigators believe happened, but not the final stamp of judicial certainty. What we do have, though, is the investigative file. And when that file was made public in late 2024, it offered the most complete picture yet of what police believed went down in the months, weeks, and days leading up to the murders. In October 2024, more than a year after the murders, police records related to the case became public. And when reporters from NBC Chicago, ABC7, Fox 32, and other outlets reviewed those records, the story they told was even darker than most people had imagined. According to the investigative files, this is what police believed happened. Rolon-Bartolomei and Nathaniel Huey Jr. were involved in a romantic relationship. That relationship was known to both Alberto Rolon and Ermalinda Palomo. All four adults were aware of the betrayals happening within their overlapping lives. At some point, Palomo allegedly began creating false online identities, fake personas that communicated with Huey, feeding him a narrative that he was under threat from a criminal organization and that Zoraida was working against him as some kind of mole or informant. These fake accounts, according to police, didn't just make vague threats. They discussed specifics. They built a world. They created a sense of urgency and danger that may have transformed Huey's jealousy into something more paranoid and violent. Palomo and Huey then allegedly began planning the murders together. They discussed how to access the home. They researched the neighborhood. They looked for cameras. They talked about how to make the scene look like a burglary rather than a targeted killing. On the night of September 16, 2023, Palomo allegedly drove Huey from Streamwood to Romeoville. According to police, digital evidence, including location data and surveillance footage, placed her vehicle in the area of the Concord Avenue home during the time frame when the murders occurred. Huey allegedly entered the home, possibly by cutting screens to simulate a break-in. Inside, he shot and killed Alberto, Zoraida, and their 2 sons. He also killed the family's 3 dogs. After the murders, Palomo allegedly drove Huey back to Streamwood. According to police files, there were even messages between Huey and the fake accounts after the killings, discussing details like phones left behind and concerns about evidence. And then, when police began closing in, Huey and Palomo fled together. They drove south into Oklahoma, where the chase ended in fire, gunshots, and 2 more deaths. According to Romeoville police, there was no evidence of additional suspects. In their assessment, this was a crime planned and carried out by 2 people, Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo. But even with all that evidence, one major piece of physical proof was never recovered. The murder weapon, the 9mm firearm used to kill the family, was never found. Did Huey discard it during the drive to Oklahoma? Did someone else help hide it? Was it destroyed in the vehicle fire in Catoosa? We don't know. And that missing weapon remains one of the lingering gaps in an otherwise detailed case file. One of the most striking aspects of this case is the contrast between what was said publicly early on and what investigators later concluded. In September 2023, when Palomo was first identified as being with Huey during the Oklahoma chase, her family's attorney made strong public statements. Palomo was described as not being involved, as being a victim herself, as being home at the time of the murders. Those statements positioned her as an innocent person caught in a tragedy she had no part in creating. But by December 2023, Romeoville police were telling a completely different story. They said digital evidence showed Palomo drove the suspect vehicle to and from the crime scene. They said she had prior knowledge. They said she participated in planning. So what changed? The evidence. As investigators dug deeper into phones, messages, location data, and surveillance, the picture shifted. What may have initially looked like a woman simply connected to the suspect became something more deliberate and coordinated. Palomo's family later expressed condolences to the Rolon-Bartolomei family, but they also continued to question some of the police conclusions. That tension between law enforcement's findings and the family's perspective is part of why this case remains so discussed and debated. Without a trial, we don't have the moment where evidence is laid out in full, challenged, and tested. We have competing narratives. We have police conclusions backed by substantial digital evidence, and we have family members who say those conclusions don't match the person they knew. Both things can coexist in a case this complicated. People can be different than their families believe, and evidence can sometimes be interpreted in more than one way. But what's not in dispute is the outcome. 4 people were murdered in their home, 2 people fled, and both of them died before they could be brought to justice. Even with all the investigation, all the digital evidence, and all the reporting, this case still leaves us with questions. How much of the motive was pure jealousy, and how much was the result of manipulation? If Palomo really did create an elaborate false reality to convince Huey that Zoraida was a threat, how much responsibility does she bear for pushing him toward violence he might not have committed on his own? Or was Huey already violent, already dangerous, and simply looking for a justification to act on impulses he'd been suppressing? We'll never know, because the only 2 people who could answer those questions are dead. There's also the question of why the children were killed. In cases driven by romantic jealousy, the target is usually the person at the center of the affair. Sometimes it extends to a romantic rival, but children. The decision to kill Adriel and Diego suggests something beyond just eliminating Zoraida. It suggests a desire to erase the entire household, to destroy everything connected to her, to make sure there were no survivors, no witnesses, no one left to tell the story from the inside. That level of thoroughness points to planning, to a mindset that wasn't just about revenge in the moment, but about total obliteration. And then there's the unrecovered weapon. Where is the 9mm firearm that was used to kill this family? Was it thrown from a vehicle somewhere along the highway between Illinois and Oklahoma? Was it hidden by someone else who hasn't been identified? Did it burn in the car fire in Catoosa? That missing weapon is more than just a physical object. It's a symbol of the gaps that remain in this case, the things we'll never fully know. Finally, there's the question of whether every detail of the police theory would have held up under cross-examination in court. The fake personas, the manufactured conspiracy, the extent of coordination between Huey and Palomo. All of that is based on digital evidence and investigative interpretation. In a trial, a skilled defense attorney might have challenged the meaning of those messages, might have argued that correlation isn't causation, might have presented an alternative explanation. We'll never see that challenge, which means we're left with a strong theory, but not absolute certainty. In the end, after all the investigation, all the headlines, all the speculation about motive and planning and digital trails, the heart of this case is simple and devastating. An entire family was destroyed inside their own home. Alberto Rolon, Rolon-Bartolomei, Adriel Diego. 4 people who should have woken up on September 17, 2023. 4 people who should have had breakfast together, made plans for the week ahead, lived ordinary lives. Instead, they became the center of one of the most disturbing family homicide cases in recent Illinois history. And the setting of that crime makes it even more haunting, because this didn't happen in a random location. It happened in their home, the place where they slept, where they ate dinner, where the boys played, where they should have been safest. That's the part that stays with people long after the details fade. The violation of the one space that's supposed to mean safety. Family crimes are different from other murders because of what they destroy. Not just lives, but the idea of home itself. The trust that the people closest to you won't be the ones to harm you. The belief that your private spaces are protected. This case appears to have grown out of intimate betrayal, an affair, jealousy, resentment, obsession, and possibly manipulation and the construction of false realities designed to justify violence. Those are motives as old as human relationships, but that doesn't make them any less devastating when they erupt into irreversible tragedy. Alberto, Zoraida, Adriel, and Diego didn't deserve what happened to them. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of adult conflicts that should never have escalated to violence. And now, more than a year later, their family is left to grieve not just the loss of 4 people they loved, but the horrific way they were taken. Some family crime cases begin with greed. Some begin with long-standing hatred. But the ones that stay with us, the ones that haunt us years later, are the ones that seem to grow quietly behind closed doors until one day, everything is gone. The Romeoville case is one of those. If you follow cases like this, cases built on betrayal, obsession, and the darkest corners of human relationships, make sure you're subscribed to Blood Betrayal Files. And let me know in the comments, do you think this case was driven primarily by jealousy, manipulation, or something else entirely? Also, tell us where you're watching from and which case we should cover next. Until then, stay safe. And remember that the most dangerous threats often come from the places and the people we least expect.